facing a letter from Brando that I like even better than the Oscar.
What did Brando say in the letter?
I'm not going to tell you.
Robert Duvall picked up the phone only once in the last decade to speak about the past, and he did not call a journalist or his agent. He called a priest. What passed between them has never been fully revealed, but the man who received that call later described it as the confession of someone carrying weight that had nowhere left to go, not guilt exactly, but grief, the grief of a man who handed everything to his craft and watched the people he gave it alongside either waste it, weaponize it, or sell it for 5 times the price they offered him. 94 years old, 6 decades inside Hollywood cinema, 1 Oscar, 0 apologies. Robert Duvall spent a lifetime being the most respected man in any room he entered and the least celebrated, and critics used the word genius, while directors called him difficult and co-stars called him a legend, usually after he stopped returning their calls. Because Duvall never confused admiration with loyalty. He could respect your work and despise what you chose to do with your power. He could stand beside you through years of shared sacrifice and cut you out entirely on the day you broke the one rule he never bent: respect the craft or get out of his way. What makes this list so quietly devastating is not that these men failed. Every single one of them succeeded at a level most actors spend their entire careers dreaming about. Francis Ford Coppola, Al Pacino, Stanley Kubrick, Marlon Brando, Bruce Beresford, Robert De Niro. These are not the names of men the film industry forgot. They are the names of men the industry worshipped, and that, in Duvall's view, was precisely where the damage began. Success has a particular way of making people forget who they were before they had it, and Duvall never forgot a single thing, not a word, not a number, not a name. This is not a story built on bitterness, because bitterness belongs to people who ran out of better things to feel, and Duvall never ran out. He kept working through every decade, kept building characters from the ground up, kept writing and directing, kept ranching in Virginia, kept dancing tango in Buenos Aires at an age when most men had stopped moving altogether. What he never kept was any relationship that asked him to swallow his self-respect. 6 men discovered where his ceiling was and found that when they broke through it, nothing waited on the other side. No argument, no confrontation. Only silence, and from Robert Duvall, silence landed harder than any insult ever could. Francis Ford Coppola was the man who saw him before the rest of American cinema did. Back in 1971, with the entire industry debating who could carry the role of Tom Hagen in The Godfather, Coppola ended the conversation with a single gesture. He pointed at Duvall and said he had found exactly who he was looking for, and that one act of recognition changed the course of Duvall's life. Duvall carried that moment the way soldiers carry the memory of the officer who first believed in them, not as a debt, but as a bond that was supposed to survive everything. The Philippines broke that bond. Apocalypse Now ran from 1976 to 1979 and operated closer to an actual military campaign, with Coppola treating his actors as terrain rather than people. During the napalm sequence, Duvall collapsed from dehydration, his lips split open, his skin blistering, his body shutting down in the Philippine sun, and Coppola ordered another take because the light was not right. Duvall obeyed, vomiting between setups, completing the sequence, and registering every moment with the precision of a man who filed things away rather than releasing them. He stopped seeing actors as people, Duvall told a friend afterward. They were props arranged for someone else's vision. The Godfather Part 3 offer delivered its message in numbers. Al Pacino received $5 million plus profit participation. Duvall received $1 million, flat. That ratio said everything Coppola lacked the courage to say directly, and Duvall read it with complete clarity. He folded the papers, stood up, and closed the door behind him with the kind of quiet that filled the room louder than a slam would have. Hours later, a fax arrived at Coppola's office. He would not act in a film about family if that family did not respect each other. Coppola sent handwritten letters. At the 2011 Academy Awards reunion, people who stood near both men described watching two ghosts share the same space, fully visible to everyone else and completely invisible to each other. 30 years of silence, rooted not in the money itself, but in what the money announced. Pacino cuts differently because Pacino was not a colleague. He was, for years, something close to a brother. They shared an apartment in Beverly Glen during the early years, splitting rent and meals and the anxiety of two young actors trying to hold their ground inside an industry that disposed of people without ceremony. Together they became legends in The Godfather, Duvall playing the conscience of the Corleone family while Pacino embodied its fire, two instruments producing something neither could have made alone. The Part 3 salary offer came, and Pacino accepted his $5 million without reaching for the phone. No acknowledgement of the disparity, no attempt to bridge it, not even the honesty of naming it directly, just acceptance and silence in Duvall's direction. 20 years of friendship, measured against one moment of choosing not to act, and the math came back wrong. You cannot preach family on screen and forget it off screen, Duvall said later, and that line was never about the dollar figures. Pacino has called Duvall a giant in interview after interview. Duvall has not said Pacino's name. At the 2011 reunion, they stood within feet of each other, exchanged nothing, and moved on. Two men who once shared noodles in a rented apartment, standing like strangers inside the film that made them both immortal. Stanley Kubrick never directed Robert Duvall, and that is what makes Duvall's public statement about him so striking. At a Hollywood Reporter roundtable in 2010, seated among peers with cameras rolling, Duvall announced that Kubrick was an actor's enemy and that he could point to his body of work and identify some of the worst performances he had ever witnessed. Ryan Gosling raised his eyebrows. Jeff Bridges attempted a laugh. Duvall sat with his hands still and his voice level, delivering a statement of moral position held for decades. Kubrick's method, sometimes hundreds of takes, actors pushed to psychological collapse in service of a perfect frame, registered to Duvall not as perfectionism, but as cruelty, wearing perfectionism as a costume. Learning that Shelley Duvall had swung a baseball bat 127 times on command during The Shining, while Kubrick sat behind his monitor asking for one more deepened that conviction into moral disgust. When Kubrick reached out about a potential role, Duvall flew to London and sat through half an hour of conversation about lighting and lenses, leaving without hearing the word emotion once. When Kubrick died in 1999, Duvall sent a single line through his publicist. "We remember the work, not the warmth." Marlon Brando is where the story begins with something close to devotion. Long before The Godfather, Duvall had studied Brando's performances in On the Waterfront and A Streetcar named Desire the way serious students study sacred texts, not casually, but for the truth he believed lived inside them. When their careers intersected in 1971, he arrived carrying decades of that admiration intact. The first morning on set unraveled it. Brando showed up 2 hours late, wearing sunglasses, declining rehearsals, and demanding cue cards taped to walls so he could avoid memorization. He improvised entire scenes with energy that read, to Duvall, not as creative instinct but as indifference to every other actor in the room. He was the soul of the film, Duvall said later, and the enemy of every actor inside it. The breaking point arrived at the 1973 Academy Awards, where Brando sent activist Sachin Littlefeather to decline his Best Actor award in protest. Duvall watched without argument about the politics, but with deep conviction about the theater of it. That night was not about justice, he told a friend. It was about Brando. When Brando died in 2004, Duvall sent Coppola a note with 3 words. Let it end. He was great once, Duvall said years later. Then he started believing it. Bruce Beresford gave Duvall the one thing decades in American cinema had withheld, The Oscar, through Tender Mercies in 1983, via a performance so quietly devastating that critics reached for the word genius and sat with it. The relationship should have been one of the industry's great partnerships. Instead, the shoot created a wound that never healed. Beresford kept demanding additional takes, trying to adjust what he called the rhythm of the performance, and Duvall refused with the certainty of a man who understood exactly what he was protecting. "A drunk man does not speak slowly," he told the director. That short sentence contained his entire argument. None of Beresford's notes moved him, and that's when Duvall assembled a small crew before dawn, without permission, and filmed the church sequence himself. That stolen footage became the emotional center of the finished film and the scene that made the case for his Oscar. At the 1984 ceremony, standing at the podium, he thanked the screenwriter, the crew, the extras, and left a space where the director's name should have been. The Hollywood Reporter named it the next morning. When asked directly, Duvall confirmed it without hesitation, saying that sometimes loyalty to a character and loyalty to someone else cannot coexist. Crew members reported the two men never exchanged a word after filming wrapped. Not on the press tour, not at the awards, not ever. Robert De Niro never wronged Duvall personally, which is what makes this entry reveal the most about who Duvall is at his core. No salary disparity existed. No speech omitted a thank you. De Niro simply built his career on a philosophy that Duvall found not just different, but fundamentally dishonest, and for a man who treated acting as a moral discipline that registered as personal. De Niro's approach became the defining image of serious American acting, gaining 60 pounds for Raging Bull, shaving his head for Taxi Driver, spending months inside dialects until the boundary between actor and character blurred past recognition. The industry celebrated all of it as the highest expression of commitment. Duvall identified a category error at its center. "The work is not in the weight gain," he told a journalist, "it is in the silence." "He is very good at playing Italians," Duvall said once, in the tone of a man delivering a compliment built on condescension. When De Niro moved into comedies drawing on his established persona rather than any newly constructed character, Duvall reportedly remarked that the mask was finally cracking. De Niro described the distance between them as different energies. People who knew both men said it was permanent and entirely wordless. Two actors linked by the same era and the same reputation, divided by a disagreement about what all of it was actually in service of. Duvall never softened any of this. 6 names, 6 different expressions of the same failure, a failure to honor what acting actually is, which is not fame, not transformation, not ego, not spectacle. It is truth, small and private and resistant to improvement through repetition. The kind that does not survive 100 retakes or a missing thank you or a 1-to-5 salary ratio, or a cue card taped to another person's forehead in place of actual preparation. When each of the 6 men asked him for something he was not willing to surrender, they found that his refusal worked exactly like his commitment: quiet, complete, and final.